Okay, our lesson today is 83362, Human-Environment Interaction, in regards to natural disasters in Latin America. And so there are a few things we're going to talk about today. The first thing is that this region of Latin America is very vulnerable to natural disasters, especially hurricanes and earthquakes. So you can see here, let's look at hurricanes. So the warm water in the Atlantic makes Latin America prone to hurricanes, and we have major losses there every year. So on average, about 10,000 people die each year from hurricanes and tropical storms. And as of 2012, the average hurricane caused $26 billion in damages. And so what does that look like? This map here is, you can see that the path of the hurricanes for every hurricane since 1851. And you can see where that Latin America, especially Central America and the Caribbean, gets hit every single year. And then we have here, this is a map or a graphic that tells us about how many times certain areas have gotten hit by hurricanes since 1851. And you can see here that the most hit area is Belize, so right in here. And then we get into, these red areas are hit the most. And so you can see that Latin America gets, especially Central America, gets hit with hurricanes quite often. And then we're going to look at earthquakes. So Latin America is located along the Ring of Fire. I'm not quite sure if you've gotten there yet in science class. But the Ring of Fire is where two tectonic plates meet each other. In our case in Latin America, the Nazca and the South American plates meet. So if we take a look at this map, you can see here where these meet. These yellow dots means that it's the Ring of Fire, or that there's earthquake activity. And you can see here through Mexico, through the Andes Mountains, those two plates meet and cause earthquakes and volcanoes. Here's a map. These were all of the earthquakes just in 2016. So you can see here that Latin America gets their fair share of earthquakes. Again, every year about 10,000 people die each year from earthquakes, and on average the earthquake damages cost about $12 billion. So they're expensive. So let's look at the short-term effects. Besides deaths and injuries, natural disasters have economic effects. And there are two major industries in Latin America that suffer when you have an earthquake or a hurricane. And the first one is tourism. Many Central American and Caribbean countries rely on tourism. That's their #1 way to make money. And so when a natural disaster hits, tourism is hit the hardest, because we know that when there's a hurricane, we're not going to travel to that country to stay because there's no place to stay. Hotels, restaurants, etc. need to be built, and be built quickly so tourists can return for those countries to make money. The other thing that this area has a lot of is cash crops. And remember, cash crops are those crops that are planted solely to make money. They're not subsistence crops, ones that you eat to live off of. And so when a natural disaster wipes out the cash crop, people in that region don't have an income until the next year's crop can be planted. So those are the short-term effects. If we look at the long-term effects, when disaster strikes, many countries focus solely on the short-term cleanup. They want to get those hotels back in order and the restaurants so tourists can come back in. But that makes it hard for countries to grow economically, because instead of putting up buildings that will survive a hurricane or another earthquake, they use cheaper material, and those buildings will then collapse the next time there's a natural disaster. The other thing this region has to take into account is climate change. That we know that over the last few years, when the ocean gets warmer, these storms pop up more and more, and there will be more damages over time. So then we look at what is the government doing about this, and how do they prepare for disasters. Latin American countries, their governments are starting to spend more money on high-tech warning systems. But there's still too much focus on the short-term fixes and not enough focus on building lasting infrastructure. Remember, infrastructure is the things that make the country run, like roads, bridges, schools, that sort of thing. And we know that countries with ineffective governments are slower to bounce back. So when there are issues in the government, civil war, corruption, we know that those countries tend to grow back more slowly. So that is 83362 HEI natural disasters. Go ahead and write your summary in your Cornell notes.